Suspend your belief and open your mind. This is They Tried to Warn Us with your host, Ray Welling. Come in, Ray.
Welcome to They Tried to Warn Us, the show where we bring great thinkers back from the dead to help explain what the hell is going on today. Today's guest saw it all coming. More than 40 years ago, he warned us that the Western world was turning into a nation of screen-addicted simpletons, that our public discourse was becoming indistinguishable from daytime television, that serious thought was being replaced by snack-sized spectacle. Neil Postman was an American educator, cultural critic, and media theorist who spent his career trying to warn us. Best known for his 1985 book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Postman argued that television, and later all screen-based media, had transformed serious public discourse into a form of entertainment. In his view, the medium through which we communicate doesn't just shape the message, it shapes the way we think. In the television age, politics, news, education, even religion, all had to conform to the logic of entertainment. Substance was displaced by spectacle, dialogue by drama, citizenship by consumerism. But Amusing Ourselves to Death was just one of Postman's larger body of work. In Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology, in 1992, Neil Postman argued that technology had evolved to the point where it had shaped and controlled society, rather than simply being a tool used by it. In The Disappearance of Childhood, published in 1982, he made the case that electronic media blurred the boundaries between children and adults by eliminating the distinctions once maintained through print culture. When everything is visible, instantaneous, and consumable by all ages, childhood, as a protected developmental space, begins to vanish. And in Teaching as a Subversive Activity, Postman challenged educators to reject rote memorization and passive learning in favor of critical inquiry. He saw schools as one of the few remaining institutions capable of resisting the conformist pressures of mass media, if only they were brave enough to try. Postman wasn't anti-technology, but he was fiercely skeptical of any society that adopted new tools without asking, what problem does this solve? And what does it make worse? So, in the age of TikTok tutors, AI influencers, algorithmic outrage, and dopamine-driven doom scrolling, we resurrect the man who warned us about the dangers of mistaking information for wisdom and amusement for truth. He warned us, but we didn't listen. So, we're bringing him back to get his view on what happened. Please welcome the patron saint of cultural pessimism, media theorist Neil Postman.
You summoned me using a podcast on a platform called Spotify. You know that name is made up, right?
We've got worse. There's one called X, used to be Twitter. Now it's mostly memes and rage.
So, like the Telegraph, but angry.
Sounds pretty right. Now, for listeners born after 1985, give us the Postman primer. Who were you, and what did you try to tell the world?
I was a media ecologist, not a technophobe, but a technoskeptic. I studied how our tools, especially media, reshape how we think. My central argument in Amusing Ourselves to Death was that television had turned everything, politics, religion, journalism, into show business. When a culture's dominant mode of communication favors entertainment over reason, serious public conversation dies.
So, not George Orwell's dystopia from 1984, where truth is forcibly suppressed by authoritarian control, but Aldous Huxley's version from Brave New World, where truth is drowned in a sea of trivia, distraction, and pleasure. From memory, you argued that we wouldn't need Big Brother to silence us because we'd be too busy watching game shows and cat videos to notice we'd been silenced.
Exactly. Orwell feared a world of censorship. I feared a world where no one wanted to read, where information was so fast, so shallow, and so plentiful that no one would care whether it was true.
Spoiler alert, you were right.
In amusing ourselves to death, I argued that television doesn't just deliver content, it changes the form of discourse itself. It turns everything into entertainment. Politics becomes theater. Religion becomes spectacle. News becomes a series of disconnected images stripped of context and consequence.
And now we've got TikTok sermons and presidential debates with emojis.
Exactly. Television began the process, but your digital platforms perfected it. You've moved from typography to videography, from logic to aesthetics, and in doing so, you've traded depth for dopamine. Television didn't just change the content of our conversations, it changed their very nature. When information is packaged for entertainment, politics, religion, education, even the news become performances. The now this culture I described, where every story is disconnected from the last, is now the default mode of communication. We live in a world where the medium truly is the message, and the message is, don't take anything too seriously.
For our audience, the now this culture refers to how television, and now digital media, presents information. On the evening news, for example, a horrifying report about war or famine might be followed immediately by, say, a story about a celebrity's new hairstyle. The anchor transitions with a smile and the phrase, "And now, this." There's no time to reflect, to connect, to ask, what does this mean? Each segment is isolated. Emotional whiplash becomes normal. Everything is flattened into equal weight and delivered with the same tone. A natural disaster and a dog on a skateboard video are just content. So, Neil, now we have a situation where the news is more persuasive than ever, but also more fragmented.
Exactly. TV news, and now its digital descendants, prioritize ratings and engagement over truth. The result is a public that's informed in the shallowest sense, bombarded with images and headlines, but lacking context. We've traded depth for immediacy and substance for spectacle.
Neil, in amusing ourselves to death, you warned that television would transform not just news, but all public discourse into entertainment. Now, with screens in every pocket and social media is the new public square, how do you see your warnings reflected in 2025?
The transformation is even more profound than I imagined. Television was just the beginning. Today, every platform, news, politics, even education, competes for attention by entertaining rather than informing. The now this style I described has become the default. News stories, TikTok clips, and even political debates are delivered in rapid, disconnected bursts. Substance is sacrificed for spectacle, and the line between news anchor and influencer has all but disappeared.
Some argue that more people are informed than ever before thanks to the digital access. Is that a positive development?
It depends on what we mean by informed. We have more data, but less understanding. The information-action ratio is dangerously low. We're overwhelmed with facts, but few are relevant or actionable. The result is disinformation, not falsehoods, but contextless, irrelevant information that distracts us from genuine understanding and civic engagement. We hear about disasters across the world, but we can't do anything about them, so we learn to tune out. The more helpless we feel, the more apathetic we become. It's not information overload, it's action underload.
Speaking of scrutiny, do we even know where we are anymore? You mentioned tools shape minds. What about tools like Google Maps?
You've outsourced your spatial intelligence, the ability to build a mental map of your world, gone. Technology promises utility, but it often replaces old knowledge with dependency. You gain speed and lose understanding.
So even maps are part of the problem?
Not the tool itself, but our blind trust in it. Amusing ourselves wasn't just about content. It was about surrendering thinking to convenience.
Neil, in your book Technopoly, you describe a society that has surrendered its culture to technology. Technopoly is your term for a society that not only uses technology but surrenders to it. In a technopoly, we stop asking whether a tool is good or necessary. We just assume that new equals better. Every social problem becomes a technical challenge, and human judgment, meanwhile, gets outsourced to machines, metrics, and algorithms. What does that mean for us in 2025?
In a technopoly, technology is not simply a collection of tools. It becomes the defining force of culture itself. We begin to seek our values, our sense of purpose, and even our understanding of what it means to be human from our machines rather than our traditions or shared stories. Technology stops serving culture and instead becomes the culture.
How does this surrender actually happen?
It's rarely dramatic. Technology brings what I call ecological change. It doesn't just add new tools, it transforms the entire environment. Old ways of knowing, wisdom passed down through stories, rituals, and lived experience, are overshadowed by data, algorithms, and efficiency. The result, which we can see today, is a flattening of culture where diversity, ambiguity, and complexity are replaced by what can be measured, processed, or optimized.
So, what do we lose when we let technology define our culture?
We risk losing the depth and richness that make human life meaningful. Our traditions, languages, and unique ways of seeing the world are at risk of being streamlined into a homogenized, technology-approved version of culture. The tie between information and human purpose is severed. We become flooded with information, but starved for meaning.
Is there a way to resist this surrender?
Absolutely. We must become what I call loving resistance fighters, people who question the role of technology, who insist that our tools serve our deepest values rather than dictate them. Education should foster critical engagement, not blind acceptance. We must remember that technology is both friend and enemy, and it is up to us to decide which it will be.
Now, in 2025, we don't just have television. We have TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, X. Every teen with a phone is an influencer. Every uncle is a conspiracy theorist.
I can see that clicks replace the remote, and screens shrank, but the effect magnified. Instead of one TV in the living room, you now carry your television, your news, your vanity mirror, and your dopamine dispenser in your pocket.
And it's always watching us back.
Television never asked for your location. TikTok does. Television didn't sell your behavior to data brokers. Instagram does. Your Faustian bargain now includes geotags, surveillance capitalism, and the illusion of connection.
And that's before we even get to the AI stuff.
You've taken my concern about visual amusement and added automation, fragmentation, and a business model that thrives on addiction and moral blindness.
Let's talk about influencers. They're the new educators, lifestyle gurus with ring lights, health tips from people who barely read. It's edutainment with a Venmo link.
A perfect example of what I called the loss of epistemological order. When we no longer ask who is speaking, what is their authority, and by what logic, we become a culture of vibes and virality. Now, even our learning is performance, and I use learning loosely.
What about OnlyFans?
Only what?
It's a pay-per-view subscription model where, let's say, boundary-free self-expression is monetized. Recently scrutinized for hosting underage content.
Let me have a quick look at what you're talking about. Whoa, I see what you mean about boundary-free. This is a grim extension of my concern that ethical trade-offs become invisible in media built for gratification. It's a mirror of our attention economy, where pleasure outpaces principle and speed outruns scrutiny.
Let's talk about kids. You wrote The Disappearance of Childhood. What did you mean by that title?
Childhood as a concept depends on the idea of gradual exposure to adult knowledge. Literacy once created a boundary. Children couldn't access adult material until they could read. But television, and now smartphones, obliterate that boundary.
So kids today are just small adults with ring lights?
Precisely. When media exposes children to adult themes, violence, sexuality, consumerism, without context or guidance, it accelerates their psychological development, but stunts their emotional and ethical growth. Childhood becomes a marketing demographic, not a protected stage of life.
You argued that television would erase the boundary between childhood and adulthood. Has that come to pass?
More than I ever imagined. Childhood, as I wrote, was a social construct born with the printing press, a time when literacy created a gap between what children and adults could know. Television, and now digital media, have erased that gap. Today, children are exposed to adult knowledge, language, and imagery from the moment they can swipe a screen. The mysteries of adulthood, sex, violence, death, are no longer hidden. The result is a blurring of roles. Children grow up faster, while adults cling to youth.
So, in 2025, is childhood gone?
It's certainly vanishing. Social media, streaming, and AI companions mean that children are always plugged in. When media is accessible to everyone, regardless of age or skill, the distinctions between child and adult dissolve. We see it in fashion, language, even in the way children and adults consume the same content, often side by side. The innocence and gradual maturation that define childhood for centuries are fading.
You also wrote teaching as a subversive activity. What did you mean by subversive?
I meant that education should challenge the status quo. It should teach students to ask questions like, what's the source of this information? What's the bias? What's being left out? But instead, schools became places where students memorize answers to questions they didn't ask.
And now we've got AI doing the homework.
Which makes the problem worse. If students outsource thinking to machines, they lose the habit of inquiry. Subversive teaching means helping students become skeptics, not cynics, but thoughtful interrogators of their world.
So, in teaching as a subversive activity, you and Charles Weingartner called for schools to challenge the status quo. In 2025, with algorithmic instruction, standardized testing, and remote learning, What would you say to teachers?
Teaching is more subversive and more necessary than ever. The danger today is not just conformity, but passivity. Algorithms personalize content, but also reinforce biases and discourage questioning. True education must empower students to ask uncomfortable questions, to see their own culture as strange, and to resist the easy answers offered by technology.
How can teachers keep learning meaningful in such a digital, data-driven environment?
By making inquiry, relevance, and adaptability the heart of their practice. Encourage students to challenge the sources of their information, especially those delivered by screens. Foster environments where dialogue, debate, and critical thinking thrive. The goal is not to produce obedient workers or passive consumers, but thoughtful, skeptical citizens who can navigate and reshape the technological society they inherit.
What about the role of technology in the classroom?
Technology should serve learning, not dictate it. Use digital tools to enhance exploration and creativity, but never let them replace the human elements of teaching, conversation, mentorship, and the shared pursuit of meaning.
So, what's your advice for educators, parents, and anyone trying to raise a thoughtful human in 2025?
Ask better questions. Teach your children to ask better questions, and stop assuming that more information equals more wisdom. It doesn't. Wisdom requires context, reflection, and restraint, none of which your platforms encourage.
Let's shift to organizations. Businesses have gone full TikTok, marketing, recruitment, even corporate social responsibility.
Ah, yes. Corporate virtue signaling in carousel format.
What would you say to management scholars?
Stop pretending these tools are neutral. Social platforms reshape what counts as communication inside and outside the organization. They blur the line between brand, employee, citizen, and meme. Look at the unmanaged spaces, where AI writes your ad copy, auto-generates your policy brief, or responds to customer complaints. The message isn't just managed, it's automated. And still nobody's asking, what is the epistemology of this communication?
Let's get into finance. Crypto, NFTs, meme stocks, Dogecoin, monkey JPEGs selling for $80,000, decentralized value transfer through blockchain hype. Sound familiar?
It's the stock ticker married to the Vegas slot machine, officiated by Reddit. And again, we confuse information systems with wisdom. Blockchain might be revolutionary, but you've turned it into performance finance. You didn't just amuse yourselves, you commodified that amusement into fake economics.
And now AI is writing news articles, essays, and podcasts like this one.
Machines are now imitating cognition, but can they reason, feel, take responsibility? If you outsource judgment to machines, you're not innovating, you're institutionalizing what Enlightenment thinkers called organized immaturity. You no longer think for yourselves because it's easier to let the machine think for you.
In the current craziness that is global politics, I can't let you go without talking about today's polarized politics and, of course, the phenomenon that is Donald Trump.
Ah, yes, Donald Trump, the inevitable result of a culture that mistook a television host for a statesman. Let me be blunt. Your political discourse didn't just fall apart overnight. It was replaced systematically by show business. I tried to warn you in the 1980s. I said, when politics becomes entertainment, the citizen becomes an audience. And audiences don't deliberate. They applaud. They boo. They vote for the character with the best one-liners and the most dramatic entrance. You didn't elect a president, you cast a leading man, seeing that the 45th and 47th Hang on, are you telling me they voted him back in? President of the United States was a reality television star whose greatest qualification for office was knowing how to dominate a news cycle. I feel no surprise. Mild heartburn, perhaps, but no surprise. This wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of a process I documented in the 1980s. The transformation of public discourse into entertainment. It's not that Donald Trump caused the degradation of politics. He simply understood how to surf it better than anyone else. When I wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, I warned that television, your dominant medium at the time, rewards only what is visually stimulating, emotionally simple, and instantly gratifying. It is a medium that hates complexity. And democracy, dear listeners, is nothing but complexity. It requires context, argument, history, delayed gratification, and the ability to tolerate ambiguity.
What about the polarization that's happened in politics today? This is something that started long before Trump came on the scene.
Polarization? That's just another word for narrative simplicity. You're no longer arguing ideas, you're choosing sides in a morality play, red hats versus blue hashtags. The nuance has been edited out like bad ratings. And here's the kicker, the medium trained you to like it that way. Twitter didn't cause polarization, it rewarded it. Cable news didn't create extremism, it monetized it. And TikTok, that's just politics on amphetamines. Your democracy, I'm afraid, has become a game show. And the grand prize? Your attention, which, if I may say, you've given away far too cheaply. You've confused spectacle with substance, drama with dialogue, and now you wonder why everyone's shouting and no one's listening. But don't worry, it makes great television. Polarization is not just a side effect of ideological conflict. It is, in your era, a design feature. Every modern communication platform you use, from Facebook to YouTube to TikTok, is built on algorithms that reward outrage, amplify tribalism, and curate the world to confirm your biases. That's not a conspiracy. That's just good business. Anger gets clicks. Division holds attention. Conflict keeps you scrolling. You are, quite literally, being fed the version of reality most likely to keep you emotionally agitated and therefore engaged. That's not democratic discourse. That's operant conditioning. And don't get me started on debates. In my day, a political debate was an argument over policy. In your day, it's an exchange of insults framed by dramatic camera angles, with moderators trained more in timekeeping than in Socratic inquiry. It's not that your leaders don't speak in paragraphs anymore. It's that paragraphs don't fit on TikTok. If Lincoln had to debate Douglas in 2025, the winner would be the one who could turn a log cabin into a viral meme. Trump is not unique. He is what I would call a symbolic endpoint, a kind of media virus, perfectly adapted to a host culture where every issue must be reduced to a slogan, every policy a tweet, every opponent a villain. His power lies not in argument, but in performance. He understands what the medium demands: attention, spectacle, and simplicity. His opponents try to beat him with facts, but that's like bringing a library to a gunfight. You see, you've been taught by your media environments that truth is not determined by logic or evidence, but by repeatability and visibility. Whoever says it loudest most often and with the best production values wins.
So, what happens to a society where the very form of its communication undermines its content?
You get a public who doesn't know the difference between a policy and a personality. You get news that feels more like professional wrestling. You get debates that are edited for drama rather than depth. And eventually, you get a citizenry that stops acting like a deliberative body and starts behaving like a fan base. That's not democracy. That's an audience. And what do audiences do? They cheer, they boo, they wait for the next season. You've turned the Republic into reality television, and I can tell you from beyond the grave, the ratings may be high, but the plot is headed somewhere dark. If you want to fix it, don't just change the channel, change the medium.
Neil Postman, thank you for returning to this beautiful nightmare. Any last words for our 2025 audience?
Read slowly, think deeply, speak with intention, and stop calling everything content.
Next time on They Tried to Warn Us, Marshall McLuhan returns to ask, if the medium is the message, is TikTok a war crime? Follow us on whatever surveillance platform you prefer. And remember, when they tried to warn us, we were too busy laughing. If you like this podcast, you'll love the book. They Tried to Warn Us, now available as an ebook or in Dead Tree version, contains not only transcripts of all podcast episodes this season, but more background and reflection on each dead thinker, along with a list of their key works and adjacent readings. And get this, there are extra chapters with plenty more thinkers we didn't have room for in a 10-episode season, including sci-fi writers Philip K. Dick and Ursula Le Guin, poet and mystic William Blake, political theorist Hannah Arendt, and, my personal favorite, the Lizard King himself, the Doors singer and songwriter Jim Morrison. Follow the links in the show notes or head to raywelling.com to order your copy. Heed the warning. They Tried to Warn Us is a creation of Clear as Mud Productions. Sound effects courtesy of Zaplats. Music is Secret Agent by Technique.